Mom stared directly into my eyes and declared, "Maya, we simply cannot manage 2 people on this trip. It wouldn't make sense to back out when we've already confirmed everything. Your sister's going to join us on the getaway. You'll be fine with it. You always are." That precise instant shattered something deep within me. 26 years of being the accommodating daughter. The girl who remained behind, covered bills, prepared dinners, and bought nearly half the things in that house. And now I was supposed to smile while they sent my sister on a dream vacation and left me behind like a spare chair in the corner. My laughter emerged, though it sounded sharp, almost hysterical. "Naturally," I responded. "Obviously, I'll be fine with it." They believed this was simply another instance where I'd digest the letdown and move forward. They were completely unaware that while they packed swimwear and resort clothing, I was mentally preparing something entirely different. For the first time in my existence, I wasn't strategizing how to survive in that household. I was strategizing my exit and calculating what I'd be removing when I departed. They continued discussing finances, scheduling, and commitments as though those explanations justified their choices. They failed to notice how I examined the furnishings, the kitchen equipment, the television set, the possessions I had labored overtime to acquire. They didn't comprehend I was cataloging them mentally, item by item, like products on a checkout list I rightfully possessed. They assumed they were abandoning me. They were clueless that by the time they returned from that getaway, the daughter they'd perpetually treated like background scenery would be permanently gone, and their beloved residence would feel hollow in ways they'd never anticipated. Have you experienced being treated like you're optional in your own family? Share your experience down below. You don't reach that breaking point overnight. It accumulates gradually like grime nobody bothers cleaning until suddenly you're suffocating from it. 7 days before their departure, I stood in the kitchen near the counter I'd purchased, browsing through work emails. Rent notification, power bill reminder, a courteous appreciation from my supervisor for staying late. Once more, the standard signals that my existence centered around obligations. I overheard my mother in the family room, her tones sparkling with enthusiasm. The hotel confirmed everything. Oceanfront suite, complimentary breakfast, wellness center vouchers. She's absolutely going to adore this. My chest constricted. I emerged and positioned myself against the door frame, observing them. My mother was brandishing printed confirmations. My father was agreeing, pretending to focus on specifics he'd already dismissed. My sister occupied the sofa, browsing her device, beaming at beachwear advertisements. Back then, I still hadn't encountered the words, "We can't manage 2 travelers yet." I simply experienced that sinking sensation in my gut, the familiar feeling I always got recognizing something was about to seem unjust, but I'd be anticipated to accept it. "Hello," I stated, forcing a grin. "What's happening?" My mother pivoted as though she'd just registered my presence. "Oh, Maya, we're confirming the getaway. It's significant, understand, following everything that's been occurring. Your sister genuinely requires this escape." I grimaced. An escape from what? Her social calendar? My father shot me a cautionary expression. "Maya." One syllable sharp enough to wound. I'd encountered that inflection my entire existence. "Don't center this on yourself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand why she needed an escape when I was the one working myself to exhaustion. But I'd learned years ago that questioning their logic only led to more disappointment. So I swallowed the words, nodded, and retreated to my room where the walls knew all my silenced frustrations. Several days afterward, the truth dropped out of my mother's mouth like it was insignificant. We gathered at the supper table consuming food from dishes I'd acquired with my first real employment paycheck. The china pattern I'd carefully selected, thinking it would make family dinners feel special. How naive I'd been. My mother lowered her utensil and exhaled dramatically. "Regarding the getaway, there's something requiring explanation." I already understood. My flesh tingled with anxiety. The way she couldn't meet my eyes told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. "We wanted to include you both," she mentioned, "but we simply cannot manage 2 travelers this time. Prices went up, the resort charges are outrageous, and your father's work hours got reduced. We needed to make a decision." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I stared at her, processing what she wasn't saying. "And you selected her." My mother recoiled, but didn't contradict it. We committed to your sister months previously. She's been anticipating this for such an extended period. You've been so occupied with employment anyway. You dislike masses of people. You recognize that. You wouldn't appreciate it the identical way. The excuses kept coming, each one more hollow than the last. My dad chimed in, his tone already defensive and annoyed. Don't transform this into theatrics, Maya. It's merely a journey. There will be additional opportunities. I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to my own ears. Will there? Because I don't recall being included in the previous one either, or the one before that. When was the last family trip that actually included me? Can you even remember? My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but not enough to give anything up. Maya, seriously, she stated, don't make them feel terrible. You understand how circumstances are. We can't perpetually do everything collectively. Her words felt like a betrayal all on their own. After everything I'd done for her, every time I'd covered for her, helped her, sacrificed for her, this was her response. I felt my jaw clench. It wasn't regarding the journey. It was regarding the pattern. Birthdays where her presents were considerate, and mine were last minute. The year they got her a new laptop while I received a generic gift card. School events where they screamed for her from the bleachers and neglected to inquire how I did. Academic awards I'd won that went uncelebrated, while her participation trophies lined the mantel. Nights when I remained late at employment to handle the electricity bill, while she requested money to socialize with friends who didn't even know I existed. I reside here, also, I stated quietly. I help finance this residence, but when it's time for something enjoyable, I suddenly don't exist. My mother's expression hardened in that familiar way. The look she gave when she knew she was wrong but refused to admit it. That's not reasonable. We value you. The automatic response, the script she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Do you? I countered. Because every instant something positive happens, it's mysteriously for her. Every sacrifice, that's me. Every expense, I'm present. But this journey, this significant special thing, it's sorry, Maya, perhaps next time. Quietness descended over the table. For once, nobody had a swift response. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. My father finally exhaled, rubbing his temples like I was giving him a headache just by existing. You're exaggerating. You're an adult. You comprehend existence isn't perpetually equal. Your sister is younger. She still requires these experiences. There it was. The identical old justification disguised as wisdom. Younger requires more. More focus, more finances, more everything. As if being older meant I'd stopped needing love, attention, consideration. I required you, also, I responded, my tone lower now, trembling with years of suppressed emotion. I required you when I was laboring double shifts instead of attending gatherings, when all my friends were out living their 20s, and I was here making sure the lights stayed on. When I was the one placing groceries on the counter while you took her shopping for designer clothes she didn't need. I required you, and I continued being the dependable one you could disregard because you knew I wouldn't detonate. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, contributed more, proved my worth, eventually you'd see me. But you never did. They looked everywhere except at me, the television, their dishes, the timepiece on the partition, anywhere except my expression. My father studied his fork like it held the secrets of the universe. My mother suddenly found a spot on the tablecloth fascinating. That wounded more than the phrases. It communicated to me precisely where I ranked. Even now, confronted with the pain they'd caused, they couldn't bring themselves to look me in the eye. That evening, I remained awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every minor moment that suddenly didn't seem so minor. The occasion they forgot my university scholarship ceremony but appeared early to my sister's cheerleading competition. I'd won a full academic scholarship, something that should have made them proud, but they'd been too busy making sure they had front row seats to watch my sister wave pom-poms. The Christmas where my present was a garment, 2 measurements too large, clearly grabbed last minute from a clearance rack, and hers was a new device she'd been begging for. The night the power nearly got disconnected, until I quietly settled the overdue expense with money I'd been saving for a car. They never even thanked me, Just assumed the utility company had made a mistake. The time I'd been promoted at work and mentioned it at dinner, only to have my sister interrupt with news about making the varsity squad, and suddenly my achievement vanished like it had never been spoken. The birthday they'd forgotten entirely until my sister reminded them 3 days later, and they'd sheepishly handed me cash with a treat yourself that felt more like guilt than love. Every missed recital, every unattended award ceremony, every time I'd needed them and they'd been too preoccupied with her to notice. They had conditioned me to be acceptable with being invisible. Then they threw the journey in my expression as if I wouldn't recognize the pattern. Only this instance I did. And the anger didn't dissolve overnight like it typically did. It expanded. It intensified. It started transforming into something else. Something that resembled significantly like a strategy. The gears in my mind began turning, calculating, planning. For 26 years I'd played by their rules. Maybe it was time to write my own. If your parents selected a sibling over you because existence isn't perpetually equal, would you accept it, or finally advocate for yourself? Comment what you'd do. The morning they departed for the airport, the residence felt like a stage arrangement for a performance I'd witnessed too many instances. Luggage aligned by the entrance, laughter reverberating off the partitions, my sister posing for photographs in her fashionable airport ensemble, while my mother reminded her to tag the hotel on social media. The performative happiness was almost nauseating. I stood near the kitchen grasping a mug I didn't even desire, observing them act like this was all perfectly ordinary, like leaving one daughter behind was just another Tuesday. My mother embraced me quickly, like she was checking off an item on a catalog. Don't neglect to water the vegetation. Acceptable? And if any deliveries arrive, simply position them in the corridor. We'll acquire you something pleasant from the souvenir shop. The words landed like insults wrapped in false cheerfulness. A keychain or a magnet was supposed to compensate for being excluded from a week-long beach vacation. I forced a grin, the muscles in my face aching from the effort. Sure, enjoy yourselves. My father patted my shoulder, the gesture awkward and distant. We'll only be absent a week. Try to relax for once. Relax. As if I'd been tense by choice, not necessity. As if I hadn't spent years being the responsible one because someone had to be. Then they were gone, the entrance closing with a cheerful slam. Their laughter drifted down the driveway, carefree and light. Then the sound of the automobile engine faded away, and I was alone. The quietness that followed was heavy and strangely satisfying. No more pretending, no more forcing smiles, no more swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. I positioned the mug down, walked into the family room, and genuinely examined everything. The sofa where I'd spent countless nights too exhausted to make it to my bed. The television I'd bought so they could watch their shows in high definition. The coffee table I'd found on sale after saving for months. The shelving units I'd assembled myself because Dad was always too busy. The blender, the microwave, the dishes, the carpet that had replaced the stained one they'd refused to deal with, the lamps that actually provided decent light, my furnishings, my equipment, my decorations. All the possessions I'd acquired over the years because we can't manage to replace that presently, Maya. And you're the one with a stable employment. The refrain I'd heard so many times it had become background noise. But now, standing in the empty house, each item told a story of sacrifice, of putting their needs before my own wants, of being taken for granted. I went to my chamber and extracted a folder from the bottom compartment of my desk. Receipts, invoices, email confirmations. Years of documentation I'd kept out of habit, never quite knowing why I held on to every proof of purchase. Now I did. Every receipt was evidence. Evidence that I'd been keeping this residence operating while they played favorites. Evidence that this house only functioned because I made it function. I'd preserved everything without genuinely understanding why. The universe had been preparing me for this moment. I contacted a moving company and scheduled a truck for 2 days afterward. My hands shook slightly as I dialed, adrenaline and determination coursing through me. It's primarily furnishings and equipment, I informed the representative on the phone. Everything I personally purchased. I'm relocating into a new place. He didn't care about the drama behind it. Why would he? To him, this was just another job, another move, another customer. But when he inquired, "Will anyone else be present?" I sensed a dark, calm satisfaction settle over me. "No," I stated. "They're away." The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd left me behind, and now I was leaving them with nothing. The following day, I went apartment searching. The freedom of looking for a place that would be entirely mine felt surreal. No compromises, no considering what they'd think, no worrying about being close enough to help when they needed something. I discovered a small one-bedroom several blocks from the shoreline, close enough to smell the salt in the atmosphere, but sufficiently distant from my parents' residence that I wouldn't have to drive past it accidentally. The building was older, but well-maintained, with large windows that let in beautiful natural light. The rent wasn't inexpensive, but I'd been budgeting my entire existence. My bank account could manage it. For years I'd been careful with money, saving where I could, always thinking I needed an emergency fund for when they needed help. Well, now that emergency fund would serve its true purpose, helping me. The landlord, a middle-aged woman with exhausted eyes and a kind smile, handed me the lease after a quick examination at my pay stubs. "You certain about this?" she inquired. "Relocating out on your own is a significant step." I smiled, and this time it was genuine. "I've been on my own for years. This is simply the first instance it'll be official." She studied me for a moment, then nodded with understanding. She'd probably seen this story before. Young people finally breaking free from difficult family situations. "Well, welcome home," she said, handing me the keys. Those 2 words, "welcome home," meant more than she could possibly know. On moving day, the truck pulled up to the curb in front of my parents' residence at exactly 8 in the morning. For a second, I panicked, imagining inquisitive neighbors texting my mother. Mrs. Henderson across the street was probably already peering through her curtains, but then I remembered they were hours away, probably just boarding their plane, consuming airport beverages and posting stories like everything was perfect. The thought steadied me. By the time they saw any messages, it would be too late. I permitted the movers in and indicated possessions out with a clarity that surprised even me. I'd made a detailed list the night before, checking and rechecking against my receipts. The sofa, the television, that bookshelf, these bar stools, the microwave, the coffee maker, the dishes in this cabinet, the silverware, the carpet under the table, the standing lamp in the corner, the decorative pieces on the mantel, the kitchen appliances lined up on the counter. All of that goes. One of the guys raised an eyebrow, a burly man with moving company tattoos and a skeptical expression. "You sure?" I held up my folder of receipts. "Positive. We labored for hours." The emptiness spread from chamber to chamber like a slow, deliberate storm. Each room I cleared felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away. The family room went first, stripped of everything except the old recliner my father had brought from his bachelor days and refused to discard, even though the upholstery was torn and it smelled faintly of old cigars. The kitchen lost its shine piece by carefully recorded piece, leaving behind mismatched, scratched-up remnants that weren't worth the cost of my time. Their old dishes with chips and cracks, the dented pots they'd had since before I was born, the appliances that barely worked. Every instance the movers inquired this. Also, I checked the folder, agreed, and observed another part of my quiet revenge click into position. They worked efficiently, professional and non-judgmental, wrapping my belongings carefully and loading them onto the truck. I left some possessions intentionally. The unattractive lamp my mother adored, a gaudy brass thing with a stained shade, the chipped side table my sister insisted on maintaining because it had been in her room since childhood, the discount mirror they purchased when I first relocated back home, with its cheap frame already peeling. I desired them to see the distinction between what I had provided and what they had selected. I desired the contrast to scream at them louder than I ever could. The house would still be functional, technically. They'd have the basics. But they'd see exactly what my contributions had meant. How much I'd elevated their living situation while receiving nothing but expectations in return. When the last box was loaded, I walked through the residence one final instance. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness. The family room looked pathetic with just that ratty recliner and the old TV stand with no TV. The kitchen felt cold and unwelcoming without the touches I'd added. The dining area had their old scratch table but no chairs since I'd bought the matching set. It felt hollow, but not sad. It felt honest. For the first instance, the residence reflected how I'd always felt inside it, like I was the one filling the empty spaces, and nobody noticed until I wasn't there. At my new apartment, I observed as the movers carried everything in, transforming the blank space into something warm and undeniably mine. My couch positioned perfectly to face the windows with their ocean view. My books arranged on my shelves. My dishes in my cabinets, organized exactly how I wanted. My television mounted on a partition that nobody else had a claim to. I signed the final paperwork with the landlord, handed over the deposit, and locked the entrance behind me after the movers left. I didn't leave a note for my family. No explanation, no apology, no forwarding address taped to the refrigerator. They'd always acted like my contributions didn't matter. Now they were about to discover exactly how much they'd taken for granted. And I'll be honest, knowing that they would walk into that gutted residence expecting everything to be precisely as they'd left it, filled me with a satisfaction I had never felt before. This wasn't simply me departing. This was me reclaiming every piece of myself they'd quietly utilized and disregarded. If you were in my position, would you walk out quietly, or reclaim every single possession you'd purchased and permit them to deal with the emptiness? Be honest in the comments. They returned on a Sunday evening. I wasn't there, obviously, but it felt like I was because my device started buzzing nonstop. First, it was Jessica, my closest friend, who resided 2 houses down from my parents. We'd known each other since elementary school, and she was one of the few people who'd witnessed the family dynamics firsthand over the years. She sent a photograph, my mother on the porch, keys in hand, mouth hanging open like she'd seen a ghost. My father standing behind her, fists clenched, face already red. My sister frozen halfway up the steps, her vacation glow fading rapidly. Through the open doorway, I could observe it. The emptiness. No sofa, no television, no carpet. Simply the sad, faded impression of where possessions used to be. The outline on the wall where my TV had hung. The indentations in the carpet from furniture legs. The empty entertainment center looking skeletal. "Girl," Jessica texted, "they are losing it." I heard your mother scream from my kitchen. She literally screamed, "What happened to our house? I'm dying over here." My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something wild and electric. I stared at the photograph for a long moment, zooming in on their faces, reading the shock and confusion. Then I positioned my device face down on my new coffee table and took a deep breath. The call started several minutes afterward. First my mother, then my father, then a flood of messages from my sister. 15 calls in 20 minutes. The voicemail notifications piled up. I didn't answer. I permitted it all to go to voicemail. Each buzz of my phone felt like vindication. I made dinner in my new apartment, chicken pasta with vegetables, taking my time to enjoy the process. I sat on my reclaimed sofa, the cushions still holding the shape I remembered, and turned on my television, the identical one they were probably accusing me of stealing presently. I ate slowly, savoring both the food and the moment. Then I listened to the voicemails accumulate. My mother crying, her voice broken and confused. My father shouting, demanding I call back immediately, his words angry and accusatory. My sister snapping photographs of empty chambers and transmitting them with messages ranging from, "What did you do?" to, "This is insane," to, "How could you?" I didn't respond. Not that evening. Not the following morning either. Let them sit with it. Let them feel the confusion and shock. Let them experience what it's like when someone makes a decision that affects you without your input. On Monday afternoon, while I was organizing my new kitchen, there was a knock at my entrance. 3 sharp, angry bangs that shook the doorframe. I recognized that knock. My father's impatient, demanding knock. My stomach flipped, but I forced myself to breathe. This was what I'd selected. This confrontation was inevitable. I opened the entrance. My parents pushed past me without waiting to be invited, their eyes darting around my apartment like detectives at a crime scene. They were still in their travel clothes, clearly having come straight from the house to hunt me down. My mother's gaze landed on the television mounted on my wall. "There it is," she shouted, pointing like she'd discovered stolen goods. I recognized it. "You took everything, Maya. How could you? Do you have any idea what you've done?" My father's expression was red, a vein pulsing in his temple the way it did when he was truly furious. This is insane. We return from getaway, and the residence is stripped bare. What is wrong with you? The neighbors are talking. Everyone saw the moving truck. Do you understand how this makes us look? I shut the entrance calmly and leaned against it, blocking their potential exit. What's wrong with me? I repeated, my voice steady. You mean what's wrong with me reclaiming my own possessions? My mother spun around, her hands shaking. Your own possessions. Those items are for the family. You can't simply empty the residence because you're envious of a journey. We came back to a shell. There's barely any furniture left. How are we supposed to live like that? The audacity of her words almost made me laugh. I walked over to my small dining table, extracted the folder of receipts, and permitted it to slap down on the surface with a satisfying thud. Sit, I stated, my tone leaving no room for argument. You desire to discuss about what's for the family? Let's commence with who actually financed it. They didn't sit, but they didn't depart either. They stood there, my mother wringing her hands, my father with his arms crossed defensively. That was sufficient. I flipped open the folder, the pages organized chronologically. Years of proof. The sofa, purchased with my bonus last year. I tapped the paper, the receipt showing the full amount. The television, my tax refund split into 12 months of installments. See this payment plan? I never missed a single month. The microwave, my card, purchased after theirs died, and you said you couldn't afford a replacement right now. The dishes, my first paycheck at the restaurant, because you said the old ones were fine even though half of them were chipped. The carpet, I saved for that for 3 months. You remember that? Or did you simply assume it magically appeared because the residence required it? My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, searching for the proper lie and couldn't locate one fast enough. We were going to reimburse you, she stated weakly, her eyes not meeting mine. We always intended to. You know how tight things have been. I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You've been stating that for 5 years. 5 years of empty promises. In the meantime, every instance the expenses were tight. Who did you approach? Me. Every instance something broke. Me. Every instance you desired to wait until circumstances got better. Me once more. But when it was time for something special, something enjoyable, something you'd remember forever, that went to her, always her. My sister, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward, her eyes glossy with tears. Maya. Acceptable. But this is extreme. You left the residence empty. People are discussing already. Mrs. Henderson asked me point blank if we were being evicted. You made our family look insane. Do you understand what this does to our reputation? Her phrases lit something in me, years of resentment igniting. Oh, now you care about how circumstances appear. Where was that energy when you were posting getaway selfies while I was sitting at home being informed they couldn't manage 2 travelers? Where was your concern for my feelings when you were showing off your resort bracelet and tagging the hotel? She recoiled like I'd slapped her. My father slammed his fist on the table, making the receipts jump. Sufficient. This is childish. You desire to relocate out? Fine. You're an adult. But reclaiming everything? That's theft, Maya. That's literally stealing from your family. I picked up a stack of receipts and waved them in his face. Go ahead. Contact the police. Show them the paperwork. Inform them your daughter stole the sofa she financed, the television she paid for in installments, the microwave she bought when you refused. Observe how that goes. I dare you. He glared at me, his jaw working, but he didn't reach for his device. We all recognized he wouldn't. He didn't desire anyone else to recognize precisely how much they'd leaned on me, how much of their comfortable life had been subsidized by the daughter they took for granted. For several seconds, the chamber went deadly quiet. You could hear the neighbors moving around upstairs, the traffic outside, the refrigerator humming. This was the moment where in some families, everything would soften. Tears, apologies, promises to change. That's not what happened. My mother sank into one of my chairs, uninvited, and positioned her head in her hands. We were so worried when we returned home, she stated, her voice muffled. We thought something terrible happened to you. We thought maybe there'd been a break-in, or worse. And then we observed that, I interrupted. You were worried about the furnishings. I corrected. Not me. When was the final instance you were genuinely worried about me, Mom? Not simply about whether I'd handle the power expense or transport someone somewhere, but about how I was actually doing, about whether I was happy or exhausted or drowning. She didn't respond, just shook her head slowly. My father stared at the floor, his anger deflating into something that looked almost like shame. My sister sniffled, but I noticed she was also glancing around the apartment, taking inventory of everything I'd managed to construct for myself now that I wasn't focusing on maintaining them comfortable. The nice curtains, the plants thriving in the windowsill, the artwork I'd chosen, the life I'd built. I'm not returning, I stated finally, my voice firm. This isn't a phase. This isn't a tantrum. I'm finished being the backup daughter who holds everything collectively so you can pretend the golden child is the only one who matters. My dad rubbed his forehead, looking older than I'd ever seen him. So what? That's it. You simply sever us over a getaway. You're going to throw away 26 years over one trip. I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of everything I'd never said. No. Over years of being invisible. Over you informing me to my expression that you couldn't manage to treat me like I mattered as much as her. Over you assuming I'd continue pouring finances and energy into a residence where I was simply a shadow. Over every birthday, every holiday, every achievement that went unnoticed while hers were celebrated. This isn't about the trip. The trip was just the final straw. My mother's shoulders shook, her crying intensifying. We made mistakes, she whispered. We didn't comprehend you felt this way. We thought you were fine. You always seemed so strong, so capable. We were trying our best. Your best wasn't sufficient, I stated quietly, the words I'd wanted to say for years finally emerging. And now you get to exist with it. You get to live in that empty house and feel what it's like when someone takes away your comfort without asking. They departed several minutes afterward, not with slammed entrances this instance, but with heavy footsteps and stunned quietness. The energy had drained from their anger, replaced with something closer to shock. My sister was the final one out. At the doorway, she turned back, her makeup smeared from crying. I'll contact you afterward, she stated, her voice small. Don't, I responded. Not unless you're prepared to discuss about what you've done, also. Not unless you're ready to acknowledge your part in this. She swallowed hard and departed without another word. I locked the entrance behind them and leaned my forehead against it, my heart racing, my hands trembling. I expected to feel guilty. I didn't. I felt clean, like I'd finally communicated the truth out loud, and the world hadn't ended. It had simply shifted, rearranged itself around new boundaries that I should have established a long time previously. The apartment felt peaceful in a way the house never had. If your family stormed into your new place accusing you of stealing what you financed, would you back down or stand your ground like I did? Share your thoughts. The fallout came fast and fierce. In a small coastal town, drama spreads faster than the current. By midweek, people at the restaurant were whispering about that family whose daughter had relocated out and emptied the residence. I could feel eyes on me during my shifts, conversations stopping when I approached tables. Some communicated the story like I was a villain, an ungrateful daughter who'd robbed her family. Others, especially the ones who recognized me, who'd seen me covering extra shifts for years, lowered their tones and stated, honestly, beneficial for her. It's about time. Jessica filled in the specifics during our coffee meetups. They returned furious, she informed me during my break one afternoon, stirring her iced beverage with intense focus. Your mother was yelling in the driveway, stating you'd betrayed them after everything they'd done. Your father was discussing about attorneys, about legal action. But then the neighbors started inquiring questions. Mrs. Henderson was the first. She asked your dad point blank, didn't Maya finance most of that possessions? You should have observed their expressions when they realized people knew. The story spread. Someone told someone who told someone else. Within days, half the neighborhood knew some version of events. Jessica said she'd heard at least 5 different variations, each more dramatic than the last. But the core truth remained. The responsible daughter had finally had enough. I imagined it, and the satisfaction was almost dizzying. My parents hadn't simply lost furnishings. They'd lost the image they'd spent years projecting. The stable, loving family with a hard-working older daughter and a sparkling younger one. Now people were inquiring why their hard-working older daughter had quietly relocated out and reclaimed everything she possessed. Why their residence appeared like it had been robbed while they were on getaway. Why the Golden family suddenly had cracks running through the middle. The perfect facade had crumbled, and everyone could see the foundation had been rotten all along. My sister tried to control the narrative on social media. One day she posted a photograph from the journey, with a caption about learning who genuinely has your back and valuing true family. The comment section did not go the way she anticipated. Someone from secondary school wrote, "Didn't your sister help your family significantly? This seems harsh posting vacation pics when she's struggling." Another person added, "Overheard she basically furnished the whole residence. If that's accurate, I'd reclaim my possessions also." You can't blame her. More comments piled on. People she'd gone to school with, former co-workers, even distant relatives started questioning the narrative. "Maybe there's more to this story," someone wrote. "Maya always seemed really kind. Wonder what really happened." My sister deleted the post within hours, but screenshots had already circulated. The internet never forgets. I didn't like being the center of gossip, the whispers following me at the grocery store, the way conversation shifted when I walked into a room. But I couldn't lie. The idea that people were finally observing behind the curtain, that felt like payback in its own quiet way. For years I'd been invisible. Now everyone saw me, even if the circumstances weren't ideal. Meanwhile, my parents were forced to exist with the consequences in a very practical sense. Jessica stated the first instance she went over to drop something off, a casserole, because despite everything she still felt bad for them. The residents appeared sad. Their phrase, not mine. Old recliner looking even more worn in the empty space. Bare floors showing every stain and scratch that had been hidden under my carpet. Echoing kitchen where their voices bounced off empty counters. The kind of emptiness you can't fix with a scented candle and a throw pillow. My dad complained loudly about how expensive it was going to be to replace everything. We didn't comprehend how much she'd purchased. He continued stating as if that was some kind of defense, as if ignorance excused years of taking advantage. They looked at furniture prices online and realized that replacing what I'd taken would cost thousands. Money they didn't have. My mother snapped at him in the yard one day, loud enough for Jessica to overhear from her garden. "If you hadn't always run to Maya for finances, we wouldn't be in this mess. If you'd actually saved instead of assuming she'd always bail us out, we wouldn't be sitting on lawn chairs in our living room." For once, they weren't blaming me to my expression. They were blaming each other, the cracks in their marriage showing under pressure. Jessica reported increasing arguments, my mother's car disappearing for hours, my father spending evenings in the garage. The stress of facing consequences was breaking them down. As for my sister, the fallout hit her in a different way. She'd returned from her journey expecting to bask in the glow of her getaway photographs and summer stories. Instead, she walked into a half-empty residence, parents who were constantly arguing, and whispers at her employment about being the favorite one whose sister finally had sufficient. A girl she worked with apparently inquired her point blank during a lunch break. "Is it accurate your family left your sister home because you couldn't manage 2 travelers? Because that's really messed up if it's true." My sister, who'd always been so confident, so prepared for the comeback, had no beneficial response to that. Jessica informed me she figured small for the first instance. Not pathetic, but stunned. Like the golden pedestal had been kicked out from under her, and she had no idea how to balance on her own feet. She'd never had to defend the favoritism before. It had just been the way things were. Now she was facing questions she couldn't answer. While they scrambled to make sense of their new reality, I was quietly constructing mine. I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant, not because I had to anymore, but because I desired to pad my savings, to build the cushion I'd never had. My apartment started to feel like home in ways the house never had. I hung photographs on the partitions, not of fake family memories, but of the ocean at sunset. Landscapes I found beautiful. Little Polaroids Jessica and I took on random weekday evenings when we'd drive to overlooks and watch the sky change colors. I purchased myself a plant, then 2, then a 3rd. Small succulents that were hard to kill, then a fern that required more attention. Finally, some flowering plants that made the space feel alive. I cooked dinner in my own kitchen and ate at my own table whenever I felt like it. Not according to some unspoken schedule I was anticipated to maintain. I ate breakfast at midnight if I wanted. I left dishes in the sink without judgment. I played music as loud as I desired. I existed on my own terms. One afternoon, my supervisor pulled me aside during the pre-shift meeting. "You've been exceptional lately," she stated, her expression warm. "We've been discussing about promoting you to assistant supervisor. Interested? The raise would be substantial, and you'd have more control over scheduling." I almost laughed at the timing. While my parents were sitting in a half-empty residence complaining about how much I'd reclaimed from them, I was being offered more. More responsibility? Yes, but also more control. More finances. More evidence that when I invested in myself, instead of in people who didn't observe my worth, circumstances actually grew. Obviously, not everything was triumph and freedom. There were evenings when the quietness in my apartment felt too loud, when the weight of what I'd done pressed on my chest like a physical thing. I had departed. I had reclaimed everything that was mine. I had forced my family to confront their own neglect by removing the safety net I'd always provided. Sometimes, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd gone too far. If maybe I should have tried talking to them one more time. If maybe there was another way. Then I'd remember my mother's phrases. "We can't manage to include two. Your sister is going." The casual way she'd said it, like my feelings were an afterthought. And the way they had anticipated me to agree and accept it. To smile and wave them off like it didn't hurt. I'd picture them walking into that stripped-down residence, the echo of their own selections finally catching up with them. And I'd think, no, this wasn't too far. This was precisely as far as I required to go. Do you think making them exist in that empty residence petty, or the only way they'd ever comprehend what they'd done? Permit me know what side you're on. A little over a week after the significant confrontation at my apartment, my device lit up with my sister's name once more. I'd been disregarding most of her calls, letting her messages accumulate like unopened mail. But this instance, something in me hesitated. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the fact that, unlike our parents, she was still young enough to change, still malleable enough to recognize her mistakes. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Maya." Her tone was small, not dramatic, not rehearsed, simply exhausted. "Hello," I stated cautiously. "What do you desire?" "Can we meet?" she inquired, and I could hear something different in her voice. Uncertainty, maybe even humility. Not at the residence, somewhere neutral. I thought about disconnecting, about maintaining the clean line I'd drawn between my old life and my new one. But then I remembered all the years where it had been me and her against the world, before the favoritism became obvious, before the roles hardened into stone, when we were kids, and she'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, when I'd helped her with homework and covered for her when she snuck out. "Fine," I stated. "The seaside diner tomorrow, 5 in the evening." "Acceptable," she breathed, relief evident. "Appreciation. Thank you for giving me a chance." The following day, she was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the back with a half-empty glass of water, condensation pooling on the table. No cosmetics, no social media prepared ensemble, simply my sister appearing nervous in a way I'd never observed. Her hair was pulled back messily, and she wore an old sweatshirt I recognized from high school. "You appeared different," I stated as I sat down across from her. She snorted, a sound without humor. "Yeah, well, it's been a week. A really long week." We stared at each other for several seconds, the quietness heavy with everything that hadn't been communicated over the years. The waitress came by, and we both ordered coffee, something to do with our hands. Finally, my sister exhaled deeply. "I'm not here to guilt you," she began. "I promise. I recognize that's what you're anticipating, but that's not why I came." I didn't respond, simply waited. She continued going, her words tumbling out like she'd rehearsed them. I require to comprehend. I recognize the getaway was messed up. I recognized it when Mother informed me, but she stated you were acceptable with it, that you comprehended. She always stated that about everything, that you understood, that you were fine, that you didn't mind. That stung more than I anticipated. hearing her confirm what I'd always suspected. Obviously, she did. I stated quietly. It's easier than admitting they were utilizing me. Easier than facing the fact that their comfortable life was built on my sacrifice. She fiddled with the edge of a napkin, tearing tiny pieces off. I grew up thinking that was ordinary. You recognize that you liked being the responsible one, that you didn't care about the journeys, the focus, the whatever. They always stated, Maya's different. She doesn't require all that. So I stopped inquiring where you were in the photographs or why you weren't included. I simply thought you didn't desire to be. I thought you preferred staying home, being the stable one. I rolled my eyes, but there wasn't much venom in it, just weariness. I desired to be, I stated. I simply learned early that desiring didn't matter. If I didn't pick up the slack, nobody would. So, I did. And then they decided that meant I didn't deserve anything extra. Simply more labor, more responsibility, more expectations. She swallowed hard, her eyes getting glossy. When we returned and observed the residence, I was mad at you at first. I thought, how could she do this to us? How could she be so selfish? But then I started adding circumstances up. She looked up at me, and I saw genuine confusion in her expression. Maya, I had no idea how much you'd been financing. I recognized you helped, but Mother and Father always made it sound like it was, I don't recognize, voluntary. Like you were being dramatic if you ever brought it up. Like you were exaggerating about your contributions. Well, now you recognize, I stated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Congratulations. The curtain's been pulled back. She winced like the words physically hurt. They're not handling it well. Father continues discussing about how disrespectful it was, how you embarrassed the family. Mother cries significantly, sometimes for hours. They fight more than I've ever observed. Screaming matches that make me hide in my room like I'm a kid again, and everyone in the neighborhood is observing, judging. Mrs. Henderson won't even make eye contact anymore. Beneficial, I responded before I could stop myself. Perhaps being observed will make them think about how they appear when they treat one daughter like a maid and the other like a princess. Perhaps public scrutiny will do what private conversations never could. She didn't argue, which surprised me. That surprised me more than anything she could have said. I can't defend what they did, she stated, her voice breaking slightly. I'm not even going to try. I don't desire to lose you because of them. I'm sorry, Maya. For every instance I didn't notice or didn't inquire or enjoyed something, I recognized you weren't invited to and informed myself. That's simply how it is. She paused, gathering courage. I was selfish. I liked being the favorite. It felt beneficial, you know? Having them dote on me, getting the better gifts, being the center of attention. It made me ignore how much it wounded you. I told myself you didn't care, because if you did care, that would make me complicit, and I didn't want to be the bad guy. Her tone wobbled on the final sentence. I stared at my sister, the girl who had always seemed so carefree, so certain the world would bend to her every whim. For the first instance, I observed the cracks, the doubt, the shame. This wasn't the confident, self-assured person I'd known. This was someone facing uncomfortable truths about themselves. You benefited, I stated slowly, each word deliberate. Even if you didn't create the system, you enjoyed it. You basked in it. Every time they chose you over me, you smiled and accepted it without question. I recognize, she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. And I hate that I did. I hate that I didn't stand up for you even once. When Mother stated they could only manage one traveler, I should have refused to go without you. I should have said, either we both go, or neither of us does. She took a shaky breath. I didn't. I informed myself it was already confirmed and too late to change. But that was a lie. The truth is, I desired to go, and I didn't desire to risk losing it by making waves. I wanted that vacation more than I wanted to do the right thing. I chose myself over you, just like they always have. That honesty hit me harder than any excuse would have. It was ugly and genuine, and precisely the kind of thing I'd been requiring to hear for years. Someone finally admitting the truth, without deflection or justification. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me. I won't lie. I desired you to feel it, I stated. The shock, the loss, the embarrassment. Not because I don't love you, but because you've been protected from consequences your whole existence. I desired you to recognize what it's like when someone makes a decision that benefits them and leaves you to deal with the fallout. To understand what I've experienced for 26 years. She agreed slowly, wiping her eyes. I get that now. I genuinely do. And I recognize an apology doesn't fix it, doesn't undo years of neglect. But I'm sorry, Maya. I'm sorry they selected me. I'm sorry I permitted them. I'm sorry I didn't observe you were drowning while I was floating along without a care. I'm sorry I never questioned why you never came on trips, never got the same treatment, never seemed to matter as much. We sat there in quietness for a while, the diner noise fading into background. The waitress refilled our coffees and gave us a sympathetic grin she probably didn't even comprehend she was giving. Outside, the ocean glinted in the fading light, waves rhythmic and eternal. I'm not prepared to forgive them, I stated finally. Perhaps I never will. The wounds are too deep, too many years of being second best. But you. I paused, searching for the proper phrases. You're not innocent, but you're not them. And you're here. That counts for something. You came. You acknowledged your part. You didn't make excuses. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and this time she didn't wipe them away. So, what now? She inquired. Now, I stated, you decide who you desire to be. Their golden child who pretends this is all my fault and goes back to enjoying the favoritism, or the person who finally communicates them the truth about what they've done, who stands up even when it's uncomfortable. She swallowed hard. They're not going to listen to me. I'm the baby, the one they spoil. Why would they care what I think? Perhaps not, I stated. But I won't even consider permitting you back into my existence if you're not at least willing to try. This isn't about whether they listen. It's about whether you have the courage to speak up. She met my eyes, and for the first instance in years, I felt like we were on the identical side of something, united against a common problem instead of divided by favoritism. I'll try, she stated firmly. I'll stand up for you, even if they hate it, even if it means losing their approval. I need to do this. I agreed. Then we'll observe. When we departed the diner, we didn't embrace, but we didn't walk away from each other either. We walked in the identical direction for a while, discussing about nothing and everything. She told me about work, about friends, about her life beyond the family drama. I shared stories about my apartment, about the restaurant, awkwardly constructing the outline of a new kind of relationship, one that wasn't scripted by our parents' favoritism, one built on honesty instead of roles. If your golden child sibling finally admitted they enjoyed the favoritism, but desired to change, would you give them another chance or maintain your distance for beneficial? Inform me what you'd do. A little over a month passed before I observed my parents once more. During that time, my existence continued moving forward in ways I hadn't anticipated. I accepted the promotion at the restaurant, assistant supervisor, a raise that made a real difference, more control over my schedule so I could actually have a life, and this quiet, steady sense of pride in my accomplishments. My apartment felt more and more like home with each passing day. I started a small savings account labeled Future Maya, finances that for once wasn't secretly earmarked in my head for someone else's emergency, money that was genuinely mine. My sister maintained her phrase, and that meant more than I'd expected. She contacted sometimes, not to beg me to fix circumstances, but to update me on what was happening at the residence. They're trying to replace the furnishings, she stated once, her tone sad. But it's slow. They didn't comprehend how expensive it was. They keep looking at couches online and realizing they can't afford anything decent. They're fighting about finances all the time. Now, another instance, she called, sounding angry on my behalf. Mother tried to inform Aunt Lisa that you overreacted, that you stole from them and abandoned them. I interrupted her mid-sentence and informed her that was a lie. I informed her you'd been carrying them for years, that you bought everything you took. She didn't like hearing that, but I didn't back down. Aunt Lisa ended up asking a lot of questions they couldn't answer. It wasn't magic. It didn't erase everything that had happened, but it was something. Evidence that my sister was genuinely trying to change, to see the situation clearly, to advocate for me even when it cost her their approval. Eventually, the inevitable text came from my mother. "Can we discuss? Simply once, please. No yelling, no accusations. We'll meet wherever you desire." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Part of me desired to refuse, to maintain the wall I'd built. Another part, the one that still remembered kinder years, whispered that I should at least hear what they had to communicate. Closure, if nothing else. I selected a public place, a quiet restaurant on the opposite side of town from both my apartment and their residence. Neutral territory where I could leave whenever I wanted. When I walked in 15 minutes late, deliberately, they were already there, sitting at a corner table looking distinctly uncomfortable. They appeared older than I remembered, and it hadn't even been 2 months. Not in a dramatic way, simply worn down by stress and consequences. My mother's eyes were puffy, dark circles underneath suggesting sleepless nights. My father's shoulders slumped in a way I'd never observed from the man who always desired to appear in control, who prided himself on being the head of the household. "Appreciation for coming," my mother stated as I sat down, her voice tentative. "I wasn't certain you would." "I almost didn't," I stated honestly. "No point lying now. I almost deleted your message." My father cleared his throat, looking down at his hands. "We owe you an apology," he stated. Phrases stiff like they'd been rehearsed in the mirror, practiced and repracticed. "We handle circumstances badly. Very badly." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for more. Which circumstances? The getaway? The years before it? The decades of treating me like a walking bank account while praising my sister for doing the bare minimum? He recoiled from my directness. My mother took a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly. "All of it," she stated quietly. We didn't observe you. Not genuinely. We observed what you did for us, the bills you paid, the things you bought, the problems you solved. But we didn't see who you were as a person. It was easier to lean on you than to admit we were struggling financially and emotionally." She paused, gathering courage. "And when your sister required something, we gave it to her because it felt beneficial to be able to give her what we couldn't give you when you were younger. When money was even tighter, and we were barely scraping by. We tried to make up for our past failures by spoiling her. And in doing so, we failed you all over again." That made me pause. I hadn't anticipated her to touch that truth, to acknowledge the underlying guilt. "So, you spoiled her," I stated slowly, processing this revelation. "Because you felt guilty about how hard it was when I was a child. And instead of making it up to me, you utilized me to finance your guilt. You used my stability to subsidize her privileges." My mother's eyes filled with tears that spilled over. "When you communicate it like that, it sounds awful. Terrible." "It is awful," I responded, refusing to soften my words. "That's the point. You need to hear how it sounds, how it feels." My father spoke up once more, his voice softer this instance, almost broken. "We were proud of you," he stated. "How responsible you were, how steady and reliable. We convinced ourselves that meant you didn't require focus the way your sister did. That you were acceptable on your own, that you were naturally independent. We didn't comprehend how much we were taking advantage. We told ourselves you wanted to help, that you were happy to contribute." I shook my head, feeling the old anger rise. "You comprehended. You simply didn't care enough to stop. You selected the path of least resistance. I was the path of least resistance. The daughter who wouldn't complain, wouldn't demand, wouldn't cause problems. So you kept taking and taking until there was nothing left to take." Quietness stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. At another table, someone laughed at a joke I couldn't hear, the sound jarring in its normalcy. Existence went on around us while our family tried to stitch something halfway decent out of torn fabric. "We're not inquiring you to relocate back," my mother stated finally, her voice small. "We recognize that's not happening. That ship has sailed. We're not even inquiring you to forgive us right away, or maybe ever. We don't desire to lose you completely. We desire a chance to do better, to be better if you'll permit us. to maybe, someday, have some kind of relationship. I studied their expressions carefully, looking for sincerity. I observed guilt, genuine guilt this time, fear of permanent loss, shame over their actions, and something else, something that looked like genuine regret. But regret wasn't the identical as change. I'd learned that the hard way. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. Here's what I'm willing to offer, I stated, my tone businesslike. I will remain in contact. Limited contact. I will respond calls sometimes when I feel like it. I might come by for short visits eventually, but I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not your financial strategy. If you're in trouble, you figure it out like everyone else. If you desire a relationship with me, it's on equal footing, respect or nothing. My father agreed quickly. Too quickly. Obviously, we comprehend. We'll do whatever it takes. No, I stated firmly, holding up my hand. You communicate, you comprehend. Now show me. You desire evidence you're changing? Go to family therapy, both of you. Not for one session as a token gesture. Commit to it. 6 months minimum. Learn why you thought it was acceptable to treat your daughter like this. Learn how not to do it once more. To anyone. My mother blinked, clearly not expecting this demand. Therapy? I don't recognize if we can afford that right now. Things are tight. Then that's your selection, I cut in, and this is mine. I won't accept anything less. You found money for a beach vacation. Find money for therapy. Otherwise, we're done talking. We stared at each other across the table, a standoff of wills. After a long moment, she exhaled shakily. If that's what it takes, she whispered. We'll do it. We'll find a way. My father hesitated, his pride clearly wounded, then agreed slowly. We'll look into it, he stated. We'll make some calls. No, I corrected, pulling out my phone. You'll go and you'll permit me recognize when you commence. I'm texting you the names of 3 family therapists in the area. I already looked them up. Make an appointment with one of them by the end of this week. Send me confirmation or we're done. Until then, nothing changes on my end. Their eyes widened at my preparation, at the fact that I'd already done the research. We discussed a bit longer, not about furnishings or finances, but about small circumstances. How I was doing at work, the promotion, the weather, safe, neutral topics. It felt strange, like discussing to distant relatives instead of the people who raised me. Polite but hollow. When we stood to depart, my mother reached out like she desired to embrace me. I stepped back slightly, maintaining the boundary. Not yet, I stated gently but firmly. Perhaps one day, when you've proven you've actually changed. Her expression crumpled, fresh tears falling, but she agreed. My father looked like he wanted to say something more, but couldn't find the words. Walking back to my apartment, I comprehended something important. I didn't feel obligated to fix them anymore. Their healing, their growth, their relationship wasn't my responsibility to manage. Whatever they did next, therapy or denial, growth or stagnation, that was on them. My job was to protect the existence I'd constructed, to maintain my boundaries, to prioritize my own well-being for once. My sister texted me afterward that evening. They informed me about therapy. They actually made an appointment. I'm going to join them for some sessions. If we're going to rebuild this family, we all have to show up differently, correct? We all have to face what happened. I smiled a little, genuinely pleased. Correct, I responded. But remember, if they don't follow through, if they cancel or quit after a few sessions, you're permitted to make your own selections also. You don't have to stay in a toxic situation just because they're family. She sent back a heart emoji, then added, I know, and thank you for showing me that. I curled up on my sofa, the identical one that had once sat in their family room, now firmly and permanently mine. I thought about the girl I'd been several months previously, the one who stood in that kitchen hearing, we can't manage to include 2. Your sister is going, and almost accepted it as simply another unfair circumstance in a long catalog of injustices. I thought about the version of me who packed up everything she possessed, emptied a residence, and walked away from everything she'd known. And then I thought about the woman I was now, someone who didn't simply react emotionally, but established boundaries deliberately, someone who recognized her worth and demanded others recognize it also. Someone who understood that love without respect is worthless, that family doesn't excuse mistreatment, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away. My revenge wasn't simply the empty chambers they'd returned home to, though that satisfaction had been sweet. It wasn't the gossip in the neighborhood, though watching their perfect image crumble had been validating. It wasn't even the financial strain they now faced without my help, though they deserved to struggle. My genuine revenge was this. I reclaimed my existence. I made them observe the hole I'd been filling all along. And whether they ever fully changed or not, whether therapy worked or failed, I recognized one circumstance for certain. I would never permit anyone make me feel like the extra in my own story once more. I had learned to choose myself, to prioritize my needs, to understand that self-preservation isn't selfish. The empty house they came home to was just a symbol of the empty space I'd been occupying in their hearts for years. Now they got to feel what that emptiness was like. Is the best revenge walking away and constructing an existence where you're finally valued, or making them exist with the guilt and emptiness they created? If you were me, which ending would you select? Comment below and share your thoughts.